What's going on?
I have a contract for you.
All right, give me the details.
Yes, I had to move out of my hometown, and apparently it has been overrun by a mean, evil dictator who harvests the town for their precious resources and oppresses the population. And you are the only one who can free my hometown. I've got $10,000 in cash. I'm going to transfer it to your account. If you're willing to take the contract, you're going to hire mercenaries and kill that dictator dead. What do you say?
Hell yeah. Locked and loaded.
Be my guest. Another day, another cry.
Hello everybody, welcome to Blast from the Past.
Welcome back to Blast from the Past. Season 2, the start of Season 2. A lot has happened, a lot's been going on in our lives. Sorry for the hiatus, we know you've all been hungry for that hashtag content, but here we are, we're back, giving the people what they want, with the start of Season 2 of Blast from the Past.
Really gonna call it Season 2? Yeah, it's a kind of silly idea. We've been off the grid for a while, and for those who have been following a little bit, just a little explanation. Like, it was mostly, I wouldn't say my fault, but it was mostly due to me moving to another place, having lots of a long time where I didn't have proper internet and everything. So we really weren't able to record another episode. We're really eager, but yeah, now we're back and we have brought you a game that is probably going to be the definition of a blast from the past, at least for the two of us.
Yes, this one was nowhere near the top of my mind when Ragnar first suggested it, but This is kind of one of those lost games. You know, when I was about 15, 16, 17 years old, I definitely spent way more time playing video games than I should have, and Jagged Alliance 2 is a prime culprit up there with Morrowind in terms of why 16-year-old Mike didn't have a girlfriend.
I mean, in a way, when you think about it, right? We've talked about this quite a few times. It's like when we say you played way more video games than you should have, but now we're doing something. If we would tell that to 12-year-old me, or if I would tell that to 12-year-old me, then it would just blow the head off. It's like, oh my God, you're doing like a podcast about video games, you're doing videos on video games. This is awesome. And so in that case, I don't think you play too much video games. So just the right amount, because we're doing fine.
Yeah, it is great to get to reach back into the recent past and kind of pick out all of these wonderful gems we've gotten to enjoy that are relevant again. A true blast from the past, if you will.
Yeah, that's true. And Jagged Alliance 2 was it was also off my mind, even though I gotta say, like, I probably it's hard. I can only guess, but this is a game that I've probably 500 hours plus in over my life. And if you look in my Steam library, there's probably something like 30 to 50 hours. So I got like one playthrough on Steam, but over the years, this was one of those games. I bought it basically on release, not even knowing that much about it, but it was just supposed to be good, and it just captivated me instantly. And I always got back to it, always played it new, because yeah, as you're about to find out in this episode, Jagged Alliance 2 is a very, very replayable game that you can approach in so many different ways.
Yeah, and very, very much of its time. It's funny you talk about your history with it, because I have like these distinct memories of Sam's Club, where it was kind of like a version of Walmart, a big box warehouse style store, and they had this was way back in the early 2000s, before Steam, before you could just go online and have all of the world's entertainment at your fingertips. You had to go out to a real store to get a computer game. Like, we were savages back then, absolutely uncivilized. But I remember going to Sam's Club, the software section, all of the neatly shrink-wrapped boxes with that mothball smell, and like, we got to go maybe like once a month, so I had to save my money up, save my allowance money or my money from mowing lawns, and that's one magical time a month when I get to pick out a video game and take it home with me, and I can't wait. And this one I remember like caught my eye for about like 3 or 4 months. It's like a image of this badass, Ripley looking commando lady on the cover, like letting a submachine gun fire spray. And then I remember reading the box art and, oh my God, a world of tactical warfare at my fingertips where I get to play like Battlefield Commander. I was just kind of like instantly infatuated with the concept.
It is quite cool when you think about it, because like apparently we both enjoy the hell out of good strategy and tactic games, but on our on our channels we rarely talk about it. And here on Blast from the Past, is it the second or third game already that goes in that direction?
Yeah, because we did Master of Magic, and now on to Jagged Alliance.
I think there's more to come. But it's like Jagged Alliance 2 was, at the time, it did not look very good. Like the graphics are very functional. They work. They have their own charm. But even at the time, it looked very outdated. Like the game came out, and right now we're talking about 2. We're going to go a little bit into the history of the Jagged Alliance series, but just a little bit, because we really mainly want to focus on the absolute gem of the series, Jagged Alliance 2, which is, in my opinion, it is the best turn-based strategy game ever made. Spoiler. Bam. This is I did not change my opinion on that, and I've enjoyed many. Like, I love turn-based strategy game way more than real-time strategy, way more than pausable real-time, whatever. I love turn-based strategy game, always have, and Jagged Alliance 2 is the absolute crown for me. Never has been surpassed. Yeah, it did not look pretty at the time. At the same time, like, I think even in the same months or something, for example, Commandos came out, which is like this real-time tactics game, which was absolutely cool at the time, and that looked gorgeous. And in comparison to that, Jagged Alliance 2 looked like a fart. Really, it really did not look good, but it worked. Jagged Alliance 2 was very functional, it was very clear, and it managed to pull so many players in by an incredible amount of content. Like when we talked about, it's interesting to see another parallel, because when we talked about Master of Magic, we picked out another game that can only be described as a feature creep that somehow works. And that's the same thing for Jagged Alliance 2, but even way more. Like, I think this video, God damn it. I think this podcast will be a lot of listing features of this game, because it's insane how much this game contains in terms of granularity and possibilities and options, and just an incredible feature creep. And we're going to get to that very soon.
It was. I'm glad you hit on that word, functional, because it really, this game, Jagged Alliance 2, really kind of captures that feeling for me. Like as much as it does not look great, like it looks very primitive, especially by today's standards. These are not polygonal graphics. These are like 2D, sprites that are like animated on a mise-en-scène in front of you, but you always understand what you're looking at. Like the characters very clearly stand out. They're very clearly highlighted on the main screen. Whether you're looking at the tactical strategic map or whether you're looking at the combat map, everything is clearly labeled. There's a lot of options. Like I remember just booting it back up, even as someone who had played going on 100, 150 hours of the original game, just booting it back up after not playing it for 10 years, I felt like I was drowning in menu options. It was like, oh my God, look how many different levers and switches and settings there are. But as you get into the game, everything kind of starts to make an intuitive sense. The game is very good at helping you understand what you need to do. And in that sense, you really do feel like, oh my God, I'm a battlefield commander who's been thrust into this extremely chaotic situation, and I just gotta make the most out of what I have.
That is one of its strong suits, that it has a very, very good UI UX experience. The game allows you to do an incredible amount of things, and we're going to compare it a little bit with how turn-based strategy games have turned out in the last decade or so, because there has been a lot of development in the direction of simplicity. Modern turn-based strategy games often
the Banner Saga. Yeah.
The Banner Saga is, okay, that's almost, I think this is almost like a chess game almost, Banner Saga, good example. The new XCOM, very important in this video also, and stuff like Shadowrun, which I was just recently playing. They all are simplified in the possibilities you have. They still give you a great sense of strategy and tactics, but it's very game design stylization kind of, because it never really 100% tries to portray a real scenario, rather than that it more feels like playing a somewhat complex board game. It feels way more gamey, and Jagged Alliance 2 basically does the exact opposite. Jagged Alliance 2 tries to portray reality down to a granular level that is unparalleled. Like, there are so many things in this game portrayed through the mechanics that makes it feel very, very, almost like a simulation. You could almost call it like a combat, like a mercenary simulation.
I think it absolutely is. Yeah, I think that's very fair.
But at the same time, going back to the UI UX, this kind of, like, if we go through all these features, you're going to think like, this is intimidating. I will never be able to get a grasp on all this. But somehow it does, because it hides a lot of the complexity under a surprising approachability. And I think that is one of the core things that make Jagged Alliance 2 a game that is still supported by the community. It came out in 1999, and it is still being updated and patched and improved by the community. And the whole feature creep, the whole massive amount of features that the original game brought was even expanded by a unofficial fan patch. Like, Jagged Alliance 2 was patched until version 1.1.2, and everybody recommends just playing version 1.1.3, which is the unofficial fan patch, which basically extends the game with 5 times the amount of content without it becoming uncontrollable. It's crazy, but it works. And that's what we're going to talk about a lot, how the game pulls that off today.
I was genuinely blown away by the amount of content, because this is something, I have played a lot of tactical strategy and tactical RPG games, everything from XCOM to Final Fantasy Tactics and Ogre Battle and everything. Like, I'm very familiar with this genre, but they tend to get very repetitive and samey. You kind of have a loop. The basic combat loop is something that you experience once, and then you're just kind of doing the same thing over and over until you get to the conclusion. And there's so much variety, and so many kind of different scenarios and map types in this game that every hour, every game is going to play out slightly differently. Even the narrative is presented in this very kind of like non-linear fashion. You never really feel like you're just going through the motions playing this game, and it kind of demands your attention in that way, which is great.
Exactly, not at all. And that's because it just maybe we should start like a little bit at the bottom.
Yes.
So one thing that I wanted to make sure you guys know is that Jagged Alliance is the second part in a series, and the series has a kind of a long-standing history. Most of it is sad, and we don't want to spend too much time either with the first part, which was a really good and successful game at the time, and with the sequels. We can brush over the history a little bit to give a little bit of context of the series, where it was, where it stands now. But other than that, I would kind of like to get that out of the way to really focus on just gushing about this game, right? So Jagged Alliance 1 came out in 1995, and before the podcast we actually both looked that up because we had the same idea. We had this feeling that maybe Jagged Alliance 1 was released before the original XCOM UFO Defense, which was called in North America, or UFO Enemy Unknown, which is basically the template for the modern XCOM game that's in stores like these days, like the remake by Firaxis. And because that was such an important and influential turn-based strategy game, and we were wondering which one inspired the other. And in this case, it is like Jagged Alliance 1 came out 1 year after UFO.
It is kind of remarkable how much DNA the Jagged Alliance series shares with XCOM, even though, I guess they could have been influenced by each other a little bit, but, there certainly there was no shared development staffers between either of the two titles, and we didn't have the internet, so it was, any rumors or development secrets would have been, through regular mail or magazines and stuff like that. So there is kind of something interesting about that period in video gaming, that you have these two games that kind of have a lot of, surface level similarities, but kind of like go in different directions with what you can do with the mechanical foundations.
Yeah. the biggest similarities of both games is that they are very, very strong, granular, and detailed turn-based strategy games, but that come with a very extensive and very interesting metagame, both with their own, though. In XCOM UFO Defense, you protected the Earth from invading aliens, and you had to build your bases and develop weapons and go to different
the other asshole countries to support you.
Yes, exactly. Convince other countries. You had to intercept UFO landings, that kind of stuff. So that was the metagame, and the missions were a very dense and detailed turn-based strategy game. And in the case of Jagged Alliance 1, something like this idea was taken into a more realistic scenario, which with just slight pinches of science fiction. It plays like on a fictional island in the South Atlantic called Metavira, and this island apparently has had nuclear tests in the past, and these tests made a type of tree on that island mutate, and the sap of these trees turned into some kind of medical wonder substance. That, of course, meant a lot of money for those who possessed it. So there was like this evil dictator guy who just took this island over by force, and then you were a mercenary leader who was contracted to, get this island back. And you got like a start amount of money, you hire mercenaries, and then you go in on a map with a grid of sectors. And that is the metagame, basically. You move your soldiers or your mercenaries across the board, and whenever you encounter enemies in a sector, you go down to the turn-based combat mode. You conquer that sector, and then there is this kind of this metagame where you have to, earn more money by harvesting these trees, and the more of these sectors you have, the more money you earn, the more mercenaries you can hire. And then basically there was like an add-on that was called Deadly Games, Jagged Alliance Deadly Games, which removed the metagame basically and sent you through chronologically linked missions where you had a little bit of influence. The outcome of your missions would determine a little bit how the future missions went, but it was nowhere near as open as the overworld map metagame in the previous games. It was way more linear, and it added multiplayer. And then there was 3 years of pause, and then Surtech, which is the developer, came with Jagged Alliance 2 in 1999, and that was the big hit. Like, Jagged Alliance 1 had been a big success. Jagged Alliance 2 basically was a strategic blockbuster.
Yeah, it took. I am not as familiar with the first Jagged Edge as I am with the second one, but it's apparent that like with the second one they really figured out that like, damn, we've got a winning format in this first one, so we're going to take everything and just kind of blow it up, just do it bigger, a more in-depth combat system, an expanded strategic view, more options in terms of what you can do with like resources and money and getting new weapons for your mercenaries and everything. And as you have mentioned, such a granular level of customization down to individual mercenaries. Like loading this game back up and looking at the way that like not only do you have different attributes that govern your ability with guns or how good you are at using explosives, but then the different parts of your body tie into those skill and attributes. And so as you take damage, as the mercs take damage on certain parts of their body, the skills become less and less effective. And it all combines to create this really wonderful feeling of combat attrition. So all of which is to say is that these are systems that were not present in the first Jagged Alliance, I don't believe. So they really, they kind of took the format they had and they drilled it down to just this incredible level of depth that still kind of blows my mind to this day, because you would not be able to make a big fancy AAA 3D game with that level of granularity these days. It's just like it's impossible. It's too much.
I think it's not affordable in any way, and it's also same as with Master of Magic. And just like with Master of Magic, of course, when a game has so many different features, there are ways to cheese it if you get a little more ahead of the curve. But it always feels like when you find ways to cheese this game with its own means, you always feel like you didn't cheat. You always felt like you just found a genuinely good solution for being a good leader.
You earned it, yeah.
And thinking about how many features are in Jagged Alliance 2, in comparison, Jagged Alliance 1 feels almost more like a proof of concept in comparison.
Yes.
Like they saw this thing works, and what they did with it, with what any good feature creep game does is like they sat there and said like, what would be cool? And then they started listing, and then their eyes got bigger and they got excited about it because all these things they think about, they were cool and they implemented them, and somehow it all worked in a way. There's just
in software development, there's this notion of like whiteboarding where it's like, let's all just sit in a room and put whatever idea we can put up on the whiteboard, and then we'll boil down the best ones, and that's what the new feature, the new product will look like. And this game feels like they put everything up on the whiteboard, and then they were like, you know what, we're gonna do all of it. Don't take anything off. We're just gonna put it all in there.
Cool. So how does the game start? Like, how do we get into the game?
So
what's the first thing that happens?
There is a the opening cutscene shows these tanks kind of rolling through this like idyllic village. You have this very kind of like, it looks cheesy by modern day standards, but you have a mid-90s CGI where tanks rolling through this a Vietnam War horror scene or something, just like grim uniformed soldiers gunning down civilians, everything's exploding, tanks are crushing everything and firing shells left and right. It's just war is hell. You arrive at this scene of utter chaos.
Yeah, and it's a poor farmer's village that got overrun by ridiculously superior forces. And then the cutscene goes over to a cafe at night somewhere in Prague, Czechoslovakia at the time.
Yes. Yeah.
There's this person who comes with a briefcase, and he talks to you in the cafe, and you kind of see it from your own perspective. So the guy you meet in the cafe, his name is Enrico Scivaldori, and he tells you about the story of his home island of Arulco. It's a fictional place. It's not specified where it is. In many ways, it feels like a banana republic somewhere in the Caribbean or the South Sea. Very varied climate on this island. And that has been overrun by an evil dictator who oppresses the population. And just a small band of rebels is trying to fight against this dictatorship, against this military oppression.
Now it is time to remove her. I have brought the money you requested. It is everything I have. However, Arulco is full of gold and silver, and you might be able to convince the miners to help us in the struggle.
He gives you, a briefcase and transfers you $45,000 or something. It depends on the difficulty level, how much money he gives you. He gives you a good amount of starting money and tells you, hey, I'm going to hire you to take back this island from the oppressors. And your mission basically is to hire a band of mercenaries and land them somewhere on the island and then take it back, basically overthrow the dictatorship. That's the plot of Jagged Alliance 2, and that's where we come into play.
And you're kind of thrust into this. I don't know how to describe it other than like you call it a military simulator. In that sense, it's almost like an overthrow-a-dictator simulator, because like the tableau you're presented with is like, all right, you're looking at the main map of Arulco, and you have all these occupied villages here, and here. So like your first mission is to just get out there, start causing hell for the enemy, and you've got to start liberating these villages from the influence of this terrible dictator.
One thing that I wanted to mention about Jagged Alliance 2 is in medias res, because know the principle of in medias res. Like many games, films, stories have this rule that starting in the middle of the action just takes the viewer, player, reader, whatever, immediately into the action and gives them engagement so they don't have to wait until something to happen. And I personally always liked when a game pulled it off to not do that and still pull you in. And Jagged Alliance 2 is the exact opposite, because you start on your laptop. You check your mail and you get like a confirmation by Enrico Scivaldori that your that your transfer happened and that your contract is ready. And then you can browse a virtual internet. Like they have their own type of browser. It's like a Surtec browser or something. It's very cheeky.
Windows 95 looking, operating
Windows
system.
NT thing. And you have options before. The first thing before you even go into the map is you put together your band of mercenaries. So where do you go? You go to AIM, which is the Mercenary Central, where you can check lots of mugshots and profiles of mercenaries with a ton of different skills and attributes and their own custom outfit. And then you even have the possibility of creating your own merc, basically. There's a site that it's hidden in some kind of personal character profile. You go on a site where you just do a psychic profile. And once you have that psychic profile done, you actually get your own mercenary that is done after your psychic profiles. These mercenaries aren't just plain faces. They have actual characters. They interact with each other. They like and hate each other. They have their own personalities, their own, each one is fully voiced.
I was blown away by that, by how good the writing and voice acting is that I did not remember this at all, but like the script is so sharp. The voice acting is actually pretty good for a game that came out in the mid 90s. It's extremely well delivered, and kind of like the composite effect is that like it really makes the world feel believable. Like even though it's a little bit campy and over the top and played kind of tongue in cheek, like it's still
the 90s theme, doesn't it?
Yes, 100%. It's so well done that you just find yourself like instantly believing it and tagging along. And like, I always like to, if I'm presented with the option, I always like to go for like a non-lethal character, so like I made my mercenary, like I gave him a tranquilizer rifle and I made him like specialize in like non-lethal knockouts. And so like I remember like every time he would get ready to stun and knock out the enemy, he would have a line like tranquilizer time or like say nighty night, and like it was silly, but like it was so well delivered and with such conviction on the part of the voice actor that I was like, damn, I wish I was there in this battlefield. Like this looks like an awesome time.
And that also has a lot of effect, like the character and profiles of the mercenaries, which you can, like even in the 113 add-on, you can see a lot more of the granularity, like what actually plays into the characters of the mercenaries. Like, for example, the nationality of a mercenary, right?
Yes.
Can determine if he or she likes or dislikes another mercenary based on racial or nationalistic prejudice, for instance, stuff like that. And it actually plays out. Like, for example, let's say you have an American character who really dislikes Russians, and you have a Russian on this team. This actually affects your morale, and it actually also gets your character to sometimes give a snarky remark towards that Russian in his team, and really doesn't want to fight it.
And so when you realize that like they not only did they write but also voice acted an incredible amount of dialogue around these potential combinations, like when you try to do the math in your head and like, okay, there's this many different nationalities, there's this many different skills your characters could have, and there's this many possible combinations. Like it's mind blowing, that level of detail.
It really
like
is.
My gosh,
it really is. And I can't exactly say how many, but I would guess that there's like 100-ish mercenaries in this game. There are two different types of mercenary agencies you can hire from. There's like AIM, which is like the main, there you get like the good expensive mercenaries there, and then there's like this kind of like this discount mercenary hiring agency, which is led by actually a character from the first Jagged Alliance, who is like really derpy and kind of really funny, and he tries to do his own thing, and his mercs are incredibly cheap. And I remember that back in the day I often used these mercenaries as kind of like cannon fodder even. And there were even like mean exploits, like for example, if you do go with these really cheap mercenaries and you give them like, you can insure your mercenaries, for example, right? If a mercenary dies, it's quite a high investment that just went awry. But if you insure them high enough and that you just let them die in gunfire, then you actually get paid more than it costs to hire them from the cheap agency. It's like, felt really bad for it, but it was economically quite efficient.
I had that sensation about kind of you like the way you're like treating these these recruits you hire just like pawns on a chessboard. Like I took a step back after a couple hours of playing this game, and I was like, damn, this is the human resources simulator from hell.
Yes.
Like I'm managing all these there's like horrific stories behind all of these numbers on the spreadsheet. Like there's people getting blown up, dismembered, like people losing their families and everything, and here I am just like the bureaucrat, just like making sure the numbers add up and making sure the right people are in the right place. Like it had a little bit of a chilling effect because the game is so fun and it's like so well paced that like you just kind of get into it, and then you take a step back and you realize like, man, like am I becoming a monster in order to defeat one? It's great.
Yeah, and I mean, and we already talked about this in Master of Magic. Kind of lots of strategy games have that, but it really starts to work once all these persons have a character. They're actually persons. And it can't be shown better than how they interact with each other. And we didn't even start the main game. We didn't even get to the overall map. We're just talking about characters. I just want to, it's taking it a little bit ahead, but I kind of want to give away an anecdote how deep this actually is. For one of my favorite mercs back in the day was always Lynx. He's one of the best marksmen. He has like an immediate 99 of 100 points in marksmanship. So he's expensive in the beginning, but if you have him, he just is very powerful. And there's another merc called Buzz. That's her that's her call sign, and they don't like each other at all. So if you have hired Buzz and then you want to hire Lynx, he just says, no, I won't work for you, not if you work with her. So that's one thing. But you can do it another way. Like, I kind of tricked the two of them to be on the same board, because you can hire one first and then have the other have like a little break, hire the other one in the meantime, then suddenly they're in the same team. That happened once. And they were fighting, and what can happen, for example, sometimes, depending on how well their constitution is, and if their mercenaries are under heavy gunfire, for instance, they get nervous, they can lose their minds. And one thing that once happens, and they bickered back and forth, Buzz and Lynx, they were like really, arguing with each other. Their morale was low, and then they were under heavy fire next to each other, and Lynx really just lost it, opened a salve of automatic fire, and just killed Buzz right next to me. And they just killed my own mercenary. And this happens, like, I read that up on forums. This is really rare that it happens. And so many of these features, especially with the characters, are, especially because there is such a huge variety of what kind of mercs you can mix, is that you talk to somebody, they will have a completely different experience with the game, guarantee. They tell you an entirely different story of how they approached it, what their mercs, how they interacted with each other, how they took on the combat centers, and so on and so forth. And this is just one extreme example of many different things that can happen with these combinations. It's very cleverly programmed and written.
Yeah, and that's this thing you kind of hit at, which is that everybody's going to kind of have a different experience and see these scenes in a different order and in different permutations. It was really cool to see that the entire game story is like that. There's no, it's not, we're on mission 1, so do mission 1 and then we're going to beat it and give you a cutscene and then it's on to mission 2. Like, it's not, it is the antithesis of that. There's kind of a general world map and you move around it, and you'll have different battles, based on where you are in the map and what your army composition looks like. But the story sequences don't play out linearly. You're going to hit different story beats depending on where you choose to focus your efforts and who's in your army at the time. And and that is kind of that's more what war is actually like. Like, not to get too deep into like what's realism and what isn't, but like right. It's kind of a piece with that very granular, realistic, gritty approach to portraying warfare on the tactical level. Because just like everything else, events don't happen in a linear and easy to understand fashion in warfare. They're confusing, out of order, people's memories can't be trusted. It's a really great example of how this mechanical approach really this mechanics first approach, I should say, kind of unifies all of the game's different themes and its art and its other various systems, and kind of forms them into a really compelling gestalt, if you will.
Yeah.
Gestalt. Yeah, I forgot the sh there. Sorry.
Gestalt, correct. So yeah, and let's go into how the game pulls that off, because we're still in the browser. We're still just hiring mercenaries. We still didn't even go into the actual real game. That was like a meta game, being in the browser where you can just get resources. So in the beginning, you assemble your troop of mercenaries for the beginning, and that you can expand in 1,000 ways later on. But you use the money you have to get a team where you say, like, okay, I have like one guy or gal who's good at shooting. I have like a medicine expert, maybe a mechanic or something. And a good leader would be nice. It would be a good starting troop. And if you can afford that, you have like 3-4 mercs. And then you close the laptop and you suddenly see this gigantic map overview of, the island of Arulco. And just like in Jagged Alliance 1, it is separated in different sectors. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's either 12 by 12 or 16 by 16 sectors. Yeah. And then you see on the left-hand screen, you see your 4 mercenaries in a little list. And it says immediately like that they have like a destination sector. So the beginning is kind of always the same. You always land far in the north in a little town where there's little resistance. And in the beginning, a helicopter throws you off into the map. So basically, we were on the large map, go right into the sector itself, and then we get the tactical overview. We see the mercs in, fully animated from an isometric perspective, and then the actual turn-based game starts.
Right, and not just turn-based. It is the most interesting hybrid, and again, I don't know how this detail escaped me, but there's kind of this interesting hybrid between real-time and turn-based, which is that on the main combat screen, before you get spotted and before you have guns out, on the enemy, you can kind of
enemy
move around.
Contact, basically.
Right, yeah, before enemy contact, you can kind of move around in real time, explore, inspect, but the instant you open the door to that farmhouse and you find 3 guys with rifles on the other side, like it instantly pauses the game and switches into the turn-based tactical mode. So if you've played the Fallout games, the original Fallout 1 and 2, very, very, very similar principle there.
I'm going to get to a little bit because there is some almost very obvious and strong Fallout 2 inspiration in the game later on. I'm going to talk about this later. But let's stay in the turn-based combat a little bit and what makes it so special. Because as you already said, you control your characters in real time before any contact happens, and that is very extremely convenient for so many reasons. Because it is literally a pain in the ass. Just imagine, you have a large map, and there is, let's say 3 enemies you have to defeat. And these enemies are in the bottom left of the map. And then you have to move your entire team over to the bottom left from the top right, just with turn-based movement. Turn by turn. And it takes ages, and it takes the entire dynamic of the game out. So that's what the game does very cleverly here. You play it in real time until there's contact. And then the fighting starts, basically. If you spot an enemy, you're just trying to put them down. And line of sights are very important. You don't have a fog of war, but you can only the enemies that are directly in your line of sight are shown to you, and you can only, not completely, but technically you can only directly engage an enemy that you can also see. So however you would think it would work in reality, Jagged Alliance 2 tries almost perfectly to portray or to adapt that into the game. So, stuff like, covered, stuff like action points. We got to talk about how the action points work in this game, because it's not a thing really anymore.
And energy, action points and energy. I'd forgotten about that too, that you have these 2 different kind of energy meters that operate in concert with each other.
Yes, exactly. So let's talk about action points and why it is important. Especially in comparison to how most games these days solve it. And it's both solutions. They're both viable.
Yeah, so with Jagged Alliance 2, I would say the best way to describe it is probably you are given a kind of pool of shared action points between your characters, and you can, take taking certain actions. If I want to fire my gun, it's going to be this many. If I want to take into a defensive stance, it's going to be this many action points. But in conjunction with that is that you're not just using action points, is that there is also, no character, it can just do 12 or 13 actions in a row, even if you have enough points, because every time a character takes an action, they also lose energy. And as they take actions, if they deplete their energy bar past a certain point, the character basically becomes stunned, or they become, temporarily incapacitated. They become slower as the energy bar. Yeah, so there's kind of it's not just you zero out the bar and then they get knocked out. It's as the energy bar depletes, they become slower, they move slower, their skills are less effective, they take more damage, the enemy can spot them easier. There's this real sense of attrition that as you push a soldier harder and harder, they're going to make more mistakes and they're going to be more likely to screw up.
I think a good way to explain it too is to let's take the new XCOM series and how they handle it in comparison to Jagged Alliance 2. So for example, and I think the XCOM design is also very similar to, for instance, the Shadowrun. It's kind of a design trend. So what in the modern XCOM happens is you usually per round have 2 action points, and you can spend them for shooting and walking, or running, or running and running, or running and shooting, I think. But basically it is it is very simplified. Shooting is one action point, running is one action point. Whereas in Jagged Alliance, just as an example, let's say your character actually has 100 action points.
Right.
But it is way more granular which action takes how many action points. So in that way, the action points in Jagged Alliance 2 are way more a representation of actual time passing in according to how fast your mercenary is at a certain task. Let's say shooting a gun, for instance, right? In a game like XCOM, it's always one action point. But in Jagged Alliance 2, there is so many different possibilities just to how to shoot a gun. You can shoot a gun very quickly just from the hip real fast. It just maybe just costs 10, 12 action points. But you can increase the amount of time you spend shooting this gun, which makes it more precise. But then let's say instead you put 50 action points instead of just 10 into the gun, then that portrays the character really aiming carefully, you know.
Yeah, I'm aiming down the iron sights and really like
lining up
hard
iron sights. Exactly, like taking time, doing proper breathing maybe. You can really just imagine how this game portrays it. And all this is included because if, for example, your energy gets lower, it actually also implies that your breathing gets heavier. So you don't aim that accurately anymore. All that is played into. And different guns, for instance. Like let's think, for instance, you have a pistol versus a sniper rifle, right? A pistol is light, quick. A sniper rifle is heavy, but very precise. But so for the pistol, for instance, it's very fast to aim a pistol in real life. So the way Jagged Alliance portrays that is you can assign different steps of precision to a gun. And the easier it is to aim with a gun, the less steps of precision you have, which means it's actually good. For a gun, you only have one step to aim perfectly, or maybe two. But with a sniper rifle, you can put in up to 7, 8 different stages of aiming more precise and putting in more effort to get the best result out of it. So a sniper rifle is slow, but very efficient at long ranges, while a pistol is very efficient at close ranges but don't have to aim so carefully. And the way this game portrays that with their mechanics is genius, because all this that I just explained basically happens very intuitively during the game. You play it and you just know, oh, I'm going to put in a little bit more effort into this. You immediately realize, oh, this is aiming a little bit more precise.
This creates such a wonderful feedback loop when you play it, because I know we've talked about this before, but like there is something really special, especially about these older games, where, you know, the game lays out what's happening, but it doesn't really spell out the imagery 100%. And so because of that, your brain has to kind of work to fill in the gaps. And so you naturally create these little mini narratives like, ooh, my sniper's on top of the roof, so I'm going to put a bunch of extra action points in there and really take time to, make sure that, this shot lands perfectly. And so, the game isn't showing you a little animatic of like, ooh, the sniper's like settling down and looking down the scope. But in your head, you can kind of like construct that scene like, ooh, the hot midday sun burning overhead, sniper pulls the brim of his hat down and like beads of sweat down his face as he carefully like aims down the scope and holds his breath as the target comes into view. Like and that's just one example. Whether you could be crouched behind a fence at a farmhouse, you could be behind a car, in a bombed out city center. Like the game has so many little different moments like this where it kind of gives you just enough to tell you what's going on, and then the rest of it is entirely up to your imagination, which can go to some wild places. It's great. You construct your own story in your head, basically.
The sniper is a wonderful segue into a perfect example of something that I only discovered like so many years after playing this game over and over. And I played with a lot of snipers, but then after, like, I don't know, during my 12th playthrough or something, I suddenly discovered that there is a feature, and it has been only added in the fan patch, I gotta say that. But the way snipers, like professional snipers in the army, in real life work is that they have a spotter. They have like a person who lays next to them, has like binoculars and whatever, and gives positions out. And there's actually a functionality in this game to use a sniper spotter team.
Yeah.
When one mercenary has the ability to be a spotter and he's next to a sniper and he has binoculars, then you can make him the spotter, which means that by scouting out enemies that are way past his usual line of sight, you can actually give the sniper both the possibility to shoot enemies that are far away, plus you also give him incredible to hit bonus.
Right.
Which means that like once I discovered that and I found a way to kind of exploit that, I suddenly approached like a map that I've been clearing out 1,000 times before, and suddenly I used this sniper spotter tactic with a silenced sniper rifle. This is also a thing. You can customize your weapons in so many ways. You can put a silencer on, you could have bipod in front, all that kind of stuff. And I was able to almost clear this map out without any resistance, and the enemies didn't even have a clue where I was because, the suppressor,
right.
It actually does not only silence the hearing range, but it also suppresses the muzzle flash, so it never ever saw me. And
gee, Ragnar, you sure know a lot about suppressors, huh?
Maybe somebody should do a video on that kind of stuff.
I couldn't help myself, sorry.
It's kind of funny. Like, I was actually, before we started this podcast, I was researching a little bit and thinking about what I want to talk about. And then this sniper spotter thing, I wanted to talk about this. And then I wrote down like silent, and then I corrected it and changed it into suppressors. And I was like, yeah. Caught yourself there.
Yep.
The reason is because one of my earliest videos, like my first breakthrough on my YouTube channel, was a video where I explained basically the misconceptions about silencers / suppressors in films and movies. And so that's kind of like a little bit of a running gag.
If you haven't seen it, go watch it. Great content.
It's unlisted though.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. All right. I'm going to cut that part out. Anyway.
No, you don't need to. Like, I unlisted it because this kind of video got so many annoying comments about, Call of Duty educated gun nuts that I at some point couldn't stand it anymore. And it also got a lot of people coming to my channel assuming from me having content about, guns, that I'm like a hard-boiled Republican.
Right.
And I was like,
hell yeah, Molin Labe, brother.
Yes, it was interesting. So I might make it public for a little while if you want to check it out. So
super extra bonus content. Hell yeah.
But yeah.
But okay, so this point about your suppressed sniper rifle and the way, the granular way in which you can have a spotter and, enhance the sniper's range, all of that kind of speaks to, like, with all of these different interlocking systems is, you have to be very considered about the kind of equipment you give your mercs and what role they're going to kind of play in your squad, because, if you bring a sniper rifle to a close range fight, like, that character's going to be screwed,
You can still hit them with a sniper rifle, but the sniper rifle takes considerably more action points to get in position. So it's very inefficient compared to, like, a pistol, for instance, or like, I don't know, a small assault rifle that is very fast and heavy in terms of stopping power.
Right. That's a better way to put it, is that, every weapon and action in the game feels like it has purpose. Everything, there's nothing in there that's like necessarily extraneous. Everything has its usefulness or function in a situation, and you can kind of like imagine in your head, like, okay, I can see that, like, this Molotov cocktail spreads damage across this radius, so it's going to be useful if I need to, like, create a choke point or something. It really encourages you to think tactically, and that's kind of a knock-on effect of this realization that, like, there's constant attrition, whether that's your characters taking damage or losing their effectiveness or just simple wearing down your action points and energy. Everything is kind of like subtracting from your pool of available resources, so you have to be very considered about how you go about each battle.
But, there are so many different ways in which to be considered. As I said, this sniper spotter thing.
Yes. I
have played through the game several times, never knowing about it. This gave me a new edge, but it was mostly more fun discovering that. And there's so many different ways. This game has so many sandbox abilities in the way that it just allows you to, find your own solutions. Like, I don't know, take mustard gas grenades, put gas mask on your mercenaries, flood a room or a house with mustard gas, go in and clear it out. It works, It's efficient, and the game never tells you, gives you a mission where it's like, now you're going to learn how to use mustard grenades.
Right,
but it's like, no, it just puts you in. There's all these tools, try out,
And it really encourages you. Like in this most recent play session I had, I was coming towards the end of a mission. It was down to the wire. Like all of my other guys were injured, so they had to hang back. I had my one mercenary who was getting ready to take down the last person, but it was like, oh man, if I push her, I can maybe push her into range to get the shot off, but then her energy is going to be totally depleted, and that's going to be she's going to be a sitting duck. So like this is it. Like should I push her to like go past the limit and like try to get this final shot in and the map, or do I hang back and maybe hope for a better opening? So I went for it, and of course, like I did it, got the shot, and ended the map, and it's just like that yes moment, like you really victory feels earned, like I think so many games just kind of like make it a little too easy for you to win, or they're scared of you like getting frustrated by failure. But this is really a game where like there's such depth and complexity to it that like you really do feel like I surveyed the battlefield and I picked out the best options out of the tactics available to me, and it was my genius tactics that like led us to victory in this battle. It's so great in that way.
It's very cool how you point out how a victory over conquering a sector, like you often, if you have good intelligence before and you know how many enemies are in there, sometimes you have sectors where there's just a question mark, so you just need to clear out until everything is dead basically. And but the satisfaction in it, and I want to compare to how it would probably be solved today. Like in modern games, game design, it is very common to have some form of progression system. So that means you just cleared out the sector, then you get your screens, you get 500 XP, and you get a level up, and you get this, everything,
You've
all these
unlocked.
little, and that's when we get a little bit. I think before we go into this detail, I want to we kind of got carried away a little bit, and I already announced that. We're going to be gushing, and we're going to completely lose the train of thought here so often because we just think about all these features that we want to talk about. We're still in the first sector. We just, killed these 3 guards that are in there, easy enemies in the beginning, and then we get in contact with the rebels, and the rebels are, they lead us into like a little bunker where they're hiding out, and they're telling us, hey, we need your support. It would be really cool if you go to this next city, which is called Drussen, which is a few sectors away, and if you could contact a pastor there and talk to him about food supplies. We rebels really need food. So that's basically kind of your first quest. The game has a handful of quests, like 10, 12 quests scattered across the map that you can actually engage with. And after that happens, you go back to the main map, and then you have this meta game where you take your group of mercenaries, you can assign them into squads. They're like, you have your 4 people, and then you click on the city of Drussen, which is like a couple of sectors away, and then you let time pass. And during that time passes, you see the little dots of your mercenaries travel across the map. And if you encounter enemy resistance on the way there, then you fight them. Or you can, let a random, you can let these random fights on the map somewhere in the, vicinity, somewhere on roads or something. You can let a random chance, like let the dice roll and let this get over with. But you're usually better off when you just engage them.
Yeah, it has about this, 3, 4, 5 hour long, basically a tutorial section, although it's pretty well disguised because it doesn't tell you it's a tutorial. But yeah, you kind of work in this very small area of the main map to liberate these first couple areas. And that kind of, again, there's no tool tips or pop-ups like walking you through the mechanics. But I think, the environments and the types of enemies you faced are varied enough that it's kind of meant to like give you a little bit of a sandbox to play in, so you can get a feel for the game before it like releases you into the bigger world.
Exactly. And technically, if you want to, you can arrive in the first sector. You don't even have to clear it out if you want to. You can leave the sector, sneak out, and go straight into the capital to the dictator if you want.
I did not know that.
You could technically completely do that. Ignore everything else. You could go for the dictator. You probably won't survive that because the capital is ridiculously well guarded with tanks and whatnot. So that's all stuff that you have to.
Let's check the Jagged Alliance 2 speedrun archive after this. I'm sure somebody's done it in 12 minutes, by exploiting stealth
I'm pretty
or
sure.
something.
So nothing technically stops you from doing that, but the game kind of nudges you a little bit in that direction. You said like tutorial, and I would call it a hidden tutorial because You just do it because it's logical. You know, you've been contracted by someone who says like, hey, help the rebels and free. So you contact the rebels. They're just right there. They're helping you. And then you go to that next city because there's an airport there. Right now, you have no means of sending in new mercenaries because everything is covered by, you know, anti-air cannons. So the first thing you do is you secure Drussen. There's an airport. In Drussen, there is a mine. So the third sector
basic
of
transport,
Drussen
basic resource gathering right there. Yeah, this is kind of the game showing you that, you know, hey, in order to, as is the case with all war, you know, it's about territory and controlling the resources that come from those territories. So like, yeah, you start with a very kind of small operational theater where you can deploy troops and where you can kind of like have your base of operations. And as you capture these different areas, you get access to facilities like an underground mine or like an airport that gives you resources or helps you move your troops around. So yeah, it kind of goes back to the whole overthrowing a dictator simulator. Like you really get that. You're not just, I'm climbing to the top of the watchtower and I took the enemy's flag down and I'm putting our flag on top and now all the buildings changed color. Like you really feel like the operational advantage you get by liberating all of these different sectors.
Because guess what? Once you have liberated a city, Didrana will not sit there and just let you have it. She sends soldiers there.
Right.
So if your sectors are undefended, then she will just reclaim the city. So you have to train militia. You have to find a pilot for the helicopter and he has to be paid. You have to, like, in order to get the helicopter, because, you know, traveling takes a lot of time. The helicopter is really freaking fast. But in order to make sure that the helicopter can actually land on sectors, you have to find the hidden anti-air batteries and take them out. Because if they're still there, the helicopter will just be shot down and you lose your transportation. And there's so many different possibilities. I'm sorry. I said, like, it's impossible not to gush about the insane variety of this game. And we're just in Drussen. We're just in the first city, and there's like 9 different cities across the map, and lots of sectors where other hidden things happen that many people never stumble upon. It's just mind-blowing how much content and how much variety this game gives you.
Yeah, you really end up getting attached to these kind of units you formed. I found, you know, people talk about this.
True.
People talk about this in XCOM that, you know, oh, I have my soldier that like I recruited from when they were still a fresh green cadet, and then I trained them up, and now they're a badass, power armored, you know, alien killing machine, and you concoct your own stories for, you know, these beloved characters that you take along with you for the game. I had the exact same experience doing this exactly because of all of these different possibilities and all of these interlocking systems. You know, the way that one character, you know, like she was an expert sniper, but then she took a shot in the shoulder, and then all of a sudden, yeah. And
the blonde British ex-SAS
former
sniper.
SAS,
He's just one of my favorite.
And but then she took a shot in the shoulder, like a real severe shot in the shoulder, and, you know, she lost many points off of her marksmanship. So, you know, she had to figure out new ways to use that character to approach a combat situation, because all of a sudden now, you know, she got like kind of disabled, and there's this attrition where like characters can gain skills, but they can also lose them. Like if a character takes a lot of damage, they might end up becoming weaker. They don't have as much maximum health anymore, or they're not as good at shooting their pistol. They don't have as many action points or as much energy as before. Even if your character is armored, you know, even if your character's not taking any health point damage, you can still be rattled by taking a shot. Like one of my characters had like the full body armor on, but they took a full shot, got knocked to the ground, and then when they came up, they were confused and they couldn't aim straight, you know, like, and that's like a very realistic portrayal of what getting shot is actually like. And so, you know, because of that, because of the interplay of all these different systems, you know, like I was saying earlier, you get really attached to these characters because you kind of understand that, like, you know, they've been in the shit and they've been through it, you know, like, and you've helped guide them through these crazy combat situations. I think, you know, one of the things with XCOM is I lose a little bit of that attachment towards the end of the game because the characters get so strong. Like, unless you're playing on a really high difficulty level, like if you're just playing on normal, you know, by the end of the average game of XCOM, you know, one soldier can take out an entire map full of enemies because they're so strong. And that is definitely not the case in Jagged Alliance 2. Like, characters can become good, but never, like, superhuman. You know, at best, they're going to just have kind of, like, a good edge in battle. They're never going to be able to turn an entire map by themselves. Yeah.
it's so cool how you basically brushed over a chapter that I really wanted to talk about that I also find very important, and you brushed over all the important parts. And you know what? Let's take this as an opportunity to go a little more deeper because basically, in my opinion, this game has one of the, if not the best damage model in any strategy game so far. Like you kind of brushed, yeah. So let me try and explain how this damage model works, because usually, games work like you have so many HP. If they're on 0, you're dead. And then there's sometimes a little bit of refinement in that. Jagged Alliance 2 is like, that's not how it works in real life, because it doesn't. So let's start with gunshots, for example, right? That's another super strong media misconception how gunshots actually, or gunfire wounds actually work, and how lethal they actually are, because usually it's portrayed like you point to someone and you shoot and then they fall to the ground, and if that's not enough, you point another time. Kind of, it's basically how it works. In Jagged Alliance, there's an intricate system of how battle wounds are actually simulated. For example, if a soldier is wounded in battle, let's say a gunshot or a knife or whatever, he takes a wound, then the health bar drops down to the amount of damage that was reduced, and the rest of it is yellow. So then you have the possibility to apply first aid. And you would think that, okay, then the health bar is full again. No, after first aid, the part of your health bar that was yellow is now pink. So that means they're patched up, but they're not healthy again. Like
they're just not bleeding anymore. Yeah. Or if you can't get them help in time, you might have to tell your soldier, like, you're on the ground and bleeding out, but just try to keep crawling towards the enemy and maybe like try to get a shot off. You have to make those hard calls.
It's really interesting how it creates these situations without scripting them.
Yes,
they just arise from the situation. If a soldier gets a shot in the head, they can get permanent brain damage from it, which totally makes sense. Or they can even get partially blind. Then, in addition to that, you have different types of ammunition that for once actually work very close to how they work in real life. For example, standard ammunition is like Jagged Hollow Point, which is, has your average damage model. Then you have like armor-piercing rounds that can really go through enemies and that can go through armor, but don't do as much damage against unarmored. But then you have like hollow point ammunition that that kind of bursts apart as soon as it enters the body, and that means if an enemy is armored and you hit the armor, the hollow point almost does nothing. But if and that's also one of those things that people who played Jagged Alliance 2 for a long time kind of love about it, is like if you have a hollow point ammunition and you get the good hit, for instance, on the head of a person, and
game over.
They do not wear a helm. In very rare instances, it can actually happen that their head just explodes like a watermelon.
Oh, it's got Gibbs in it. I didn't know that. Wow.
It's very rare. It's not one of these games where constantly the enemies just flail apart.
It's kind of a piece with what you were saying earlier, with you have these two mercenaries and normally they can't be together, but through some fluke they did end up together, and then it created this like very unlikely scenario that nevertheless was still programmed in there. In the same way, I played the game for however many hundreds of hours, and I didn't know that if you used hollow point against an unarmored head, you could cause the head to explode. Like, I don't think I ever saw that. And that level of attention to detail of putting something in there that only maybe 0.5% of players are ever going to see, like, that speaks to such an impressive confidence in design philosophy that you take the time to put something in there like that, knowing that like this is for the people who are really going to dig into the game and are going to see something special, like, because I think there's a lot of, I was about to say cowardice, which is maybe a little bit of a strong word, but like, I think there's a reticence to put too much stuff that's hard to get in games because it costs a lot of money to make video games these days. So you want to make sure that if someone plays the game, they're going to see 75, 80, 90,
a big part of it,
90% of everything there is to see in the game. And there's I think, to credit, like, there are some studios that do that very well. Like, I think BioWare is very good at kind of putting that out of the way stuff in there, even in their newer games. But generally, in a big budget AAA release, you're not going to put something in there that only 0.5% of players are are going to see. And, this game was made a lot earlier than modern AAA games, but at the same time, as we've been saying, like, it must have taken an incredible amount of planning and effort to implement all of these different systems. So it's really quite amazing when you get down to it that they had enough confidence in the design of this game that they put these, ridiculously far-fetched scenarios in there, knowing that, like, somebody's going to see it and think it's really cool.
So yeah, I'm still in this comparison. Yeah, exactly. I'm still in this comparison of my friend and me. And I tried to go, like, there's a day and night cycle, of course. And if you go at night, then enemies in these towns have like way shorter, viewing ranges. And I actually, it's quite heavy. This game is not designed primarily as a stealth game, but you can play it as that. You can play it as that on your, and it works. You can actually, if you really use the tools in the way that, you make the weapons quiet. You come at night, you approach enemies from behind and so on. You only encounter them if you can take them out quickly without too much noise, because noise also spreads and alarms others, right? When you suddenly manage to, liberate an entire sector without the enemies noticing, it's such an incredible feeling. And stuff like it's so clever how enemies react to you. If they think you are in a certain spot and they can't see you because you're too far away, it can happen that they throw like these little, these little that you like bend and then they start glowing, and they throw glow stick toward you, and suddenly you're in a light ray, and suddenly all these enemies open fire on you from all ranges, and you can't see them because you're in the light right now. That kind of stuff can happen.
Right.
And then I'm so rambling. Went to my friend and we talked, and he did a completely different approach. Like, he told me that he found out about using mortars, and I didn't even know that you could do that. You have a mortar, you have a spotter who tells you where enemies are far away, and you're just...
It's easy to just get stuck in on guns, but I had the same... I played for a couple hours, I was just using guns, and then I was like, oh, let me see what this explosives thing is about. There's a whole nother layer of different types of explosive weapons you can use. C4, rocket launchers, grenade launchers, mines, like anything you could want. And it's as much fun and as fleshed out as the guns themselves.
It's explosives. The most logical thing about it is, like, what if, for example, there's a house and there's an enemy really funneled in. You can't get in. You only have like one access door or something, and they really have the drop on you. Well, if you have explosives, then just blow a hole in the wall behind them, and it works. It works as you think it would work most of the time.
Yeah, you've given me, just hearing you talk about that, like, you've given me the great idea. Like, if I ever were to, like, get into game modding, I would want to mod Jagged Alliance 2 and create, like, mini campaign scenarios. One, Predator,
wow.
You would have, like, Arnold, Schwarzenegger and Jesse Ventura, like, hunting down the Predator. And then 2, I think, Aliens 2, the James Cameron Aliens, like, I think, like, controlling a squad of colonial marines.
I mean, you have aliens in the world. There's like an optional sci-fi mode.
That's true. There's a sci-fi mode. Yes. Oh my God! I had forgotten about this because it had been, honestly, it had been probably almost 15 years since I played the game, maybe a little bit less, but like it's been quite a while since I played the game. I looked at looking at the menu options, and I'm like, oh, sci-fi mode, what's that? And then literally bugs come out of the ground.
It's amazing. It's basically when you start the game, there's a couple of options, and with 1.1.3 you have like a massive amount of options to customize the game. And one of them is like sci-fi mode. And that means at some point there might be like, aliens and like mine crawler creatures in the mines and stuff like that. And if you turn that off, you say like, no, I kind of want it a little bit more realistic. Then you can just turn that off. And speaking of the Schwarzenegger thing, right? There is actually a soldier, like a mercenary who's strongly modeled after an Arnold Schwarzenegger character.
Yes,
it's
definitely.
Ivan. It's like he also looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and his name is Ivan Dolvich. He's like an ex-Red Army soldier, and he's definitely modeled after Ivan Danko from the Red Heat movie with James Belushi. And he's one of the most fun characters. Like he was already in the first game. So in the first game he only spoke Russian. The second game he learned Russian, but he has so many funny, cynical commentaries from his glasnost perestroika point of view. It's really, really cool. It's a really enjoyable character.
Oh, where were the Jesse Ventura and the Carl Weathers mercenaries? Damn, that's all that was missing.
I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised.
So why don't you use the regular army? What do you need us for? Because some damn fool accused you of being the best. Dylan! You son of a bitch.
But speaking of historicity, you know, one thing I did want to get in before we get to the end here is that replaying this game, it really it occurred to me that this game could only really have been made in that kind of era, you know, between the end of the Cold War and 9/11. Like this game very much feels like a game that was made in 1999, when the biggest concerns were these kind of stateless actors, not motivated by any particular ideology other than just pure greed. And you know, there's this is a 90s trope across movies and video games and TV, you know, the rogue dictator who just kind of moves into a nation and takes it over, and it's an international crisis, and the community has to respond. Hey, you know, that was the plot of the live action Street Fighter movie, which, let me tell you, if you want to watch a good video essay about that shit, link in the description.
Exactly that.
No, but that's an example of, you know, just another trope that was very much of a piece with kind of our 90s post-Cold War, but we didn't quite yet have this war on terror fixation.
There's such a cool line that I just encountered during the recent replay. And so, for example, in the first mission that you get, when you get food for the rebels, right, you have to contact this priest in the first town. And you talk to this priest, and you have a little bit of a chat with him about the dictator and everything. And he says, yeah, she, you know, we're not completely eye to eye, but she usually leaves me alone because she doesn't want to, you know, she doesn't want to piss off the Pope because, and then he says because he really likes, you know, destabilizing some remote dictators. It's kind of a hobby of his. And I'm this is really funny. The writing in this game is sometimes remarkably brilliant and funny, too. You know, it has this 90s one-linery kind of humor.
Amazingly sharp writing.
There are so many clever lines in there.
You know, I'd be willing to bet it probably has to do with the fact that I'm betting that most of that dialogue was written by either one person or 1 to 3 people. I'm willing to bet that that's why the game has such a consistent tone, because you don't see that anymore. Nowadays, again, with how big the scope of games have gotten, you might have 20 people working on a game's narrative and dialogue, you know, and so because of that, you lose that consistent voice. And I think a lot of opportunities to be playful and humorous, because everything kind of just gets flattened out to be as inoffensive and pleasing as possible. And there are some really great zingers in Jagged Alliance too. It has a lot of personality.
I mean, in a way, here's the thing about humor in these kind of more realistic, you know, militaristic games, or in these slightly darker scenarios. I'm usually a little bit, and that's just a personal preference. I'm usually a little bit turned off if a game that is, you know, about something quite serious gets too goofy. And Jagged Alliance 2 does not get goofy at all. It's not like a silly game. The humor, I would compare it a lot with something like Fallout 2, but toned down. It doesn't hit you in the face so much, but it's in a similar level of clever. You know, it has these moments where it just suddenly hits you by how smart it is written and by how surprising it can be and how it, you know, delivers its narrative. And speaking about the humor, we actually prepared a little bit of an example. So to give a little bit of pretext, we said there is this dictator that has overrun Arulco, her name is Didrana. It's a female dictator.
Yes, Romanian, clearly post-Soviet. She was some kind of Soviet apparatchik during her time, and now she's got to, you know, make her way in the world.
And she's not faceless at all, because every time you accomplish something on the island, you get these little scenes in her palace in the isometric in-game graphic, and she talks to her closest advisor. His name is Elliot, and he's a little bit of a doofus, and he's very...
A little bit.
And so he basically comes in and gives her the bad news. That's usually what happens. And then she reacts to his bad news in her own very specific way. And I think we're just going to show you one of those interactions, completely unabbreviated, and then we're going to comment on it a little bit, okay?
This better be good. Forgive the intrusion, Your Highness, but one of our North patrols has been attacked. Elliot, you idiot! We crushed those rebels in Omerta! How can it be? From what we have learned, Your Majesty, the rebels seem to have some sort of foreign aid, commando types. We speculate they arrived on the helicopter that was spotted earlier.
That was great.
It's wonderful. So yeah, that is...
Elliot, you
Elliot,
idiot!
you idiot. That is really, I think in every single one of these, like, it gets it becomes a running gag. Like, that Elliot comes with bad news, and you heard these little slaps. It's like slap left, slap right. And every single time, Elliot gets, punished for our success. And you start feeling bad for the guy.
Right.
And there's also this cool progression in there, because every time you see a new clip, like all these soldiers, NPCs, all of them, they have you can talk to, they have portraits that are animated where you could see them talking like in a little bit more detail and everything. And Elliot also has you see his portrait when he's talking, and every single time you see his face a little more,
Yes, bruised and battered.
Like, because every time he gets beaten up by Dedrana, and in the end he looks really, really bad. He looks almost like Doom Guy on 2 health. It's like, and you start feeling bad for him over time. And that all gives the whole thing so much more personality and charm, if you think about it, right? So there's this one thing that I once discovered. I don't know if you've discovered that. It might be one of those other things where you think this game is genius. There is different, shops in your laptop and your browser where you can buy, supplies and ammunition, all kinds of stuff. There's also a flower store for some reason.
Oh, yeah.
And you can go into the flower store and actually send a bouquet of flowers to Meduna, which is like the capital, to Dedrana. Type in a personal message, like, I don't know, you can send black roses, and you can type whatever you want, and then a little bit later, you get another sequence with, Dedrana and Elliot. Yeah, I think in this little sequence, she slaps him like 3 or 4 times because she's furious that we have the tenacity of sending her flowers.
What is it now, Elliot? Oh, flowers. Oh, lovely. And so thoughtful. From my troops, no doubt.
Not exactly, Your Highness. From theirs.
What?
Yes, Your Majesty. It seems the flowers are a gift to Your Highness from the mercenaries. Perhaps they have taken a fondness toward you.
Elliot! You idiot! Idiot! Idiot!
All these little things, make this game such an amazing bliss to just try out and experiment and have fun with all these mechanics.
It really is. A lot of games purport to be sandboxes, or they say that, this is like a sandbox, open world, whatever. But when you get down to it, player freedom actually is kind of limited, to within a few specific mechanics. This game really feels like a sandbox to me. And as I said at the beginning, it is overwhelming at first. There's so many options on the strategic screen, so many tactical options on the combat screen. You really will feel overwhelmed at first. But if you stick with it and take the time, just, if you're the sort of person who likes tactical strategy games of any kind, this is a no-brainer. Yes. You should play this. But even if you're not, if you enjoy older games in the vein of Alpha Centauri or Master of Magic or Civilization, then you probably have the patience for a game like this. So go for it, because it really feels like the player just kind of gets dropped into this war zone that is a playpen, basically, for you to just kind of do whatever. You get to take your action figures, and this one's got a bazooka, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. I was surprised at how much I ended up enjoying the game.
Wonderful, yeah. There's definitely 3 tiny more things that I definitely want to add before we end this. And I'm going to try to keep them brief because I've been extra rambly today. But it's the first thing is these, as you said, it's in the beginning, the whole UI is overwhelming. And as I said, I can totally see that because there's just so much you can do with it. And it's very hard for me to see the game with the eyes of somebody who approaches it newly, because I haven't played this game in a couple of years.
Very true.
But then I started it, and for some reason, I must have played it so much that all the keyboard shortcuts, all the controls, they were still like, muscle memory was still there. So it's very hard for me to tell how it would be to approach, especially with a modern mindset. You might just have to play and try it for yourself. It's really worth it. Another tiny thing that I wanted to add is before we started to set this game up, like just in the case, for example, that you are playing on Windows 10, you might run into a couple of performance problems. And we're going to add, like wherever you're listening, either on YouTube or on Stitcher or on iTunes, we're going to try and add little hints as to how to get the game running. Like maybe I'm going to put together a Google Doc where we give a few tips on how to get the game running, because it's really a bummer because you can get the game running, but the performance is dreadful, and you might think that's just how the game works, but it actually runs quite smoothly if you know what to do. So we're going to give a few tips there. Look in the description and see for yourself, and just make sure that the game runs ideally. Then it's way more pleasant to play. And thirdly, there was something that I kind of hinted at before that I want to talk about later, and even though it never found a good segue into that, was the whole thing that seems like a big inspiration to Fallout 2. And I kind of wanted to just mention that in case you were got your hopes up, and that is, there is one city in Arulco that I believe is inspired by New Reno from Fallout 2, and that is San Mona, because New Reno in Fallout 2 is basically this mob-controlled gambling city, crime syndicate area, which is a very specific and very memorable region of the game. And San Mona in Jagged Alliance 2 is quite the same. It is controlled by the mafia, by a kingpin. It is a couple of sectors, and the first thing you notice when you come into it, like, there's no opposition. You just go in there and you're free to do whatever you want, so because this is controlled by mob, and you have a couple of different quests that you absolutely don't have to do. You don't conquer that sector. It's basically kind of like a little bit of a side area that feels completely different. You do a couple of quests. You can go gambling, you can get a tattoo, you can go into the brothel, or you can save somebody who has been forced to work in that brothel for her brother, that kind of stuff. And it's just, all of this is on top. You don't get extra XP or something for that. It's just a little bit of a side experience, and I'm very certain that this took a strong influence from Fallout 2. So I just wanted to get back to that.
Yeah, well, and this is, Fallout 2, something that's just there. It was put in there. The player is not given any breadcrumbs or any trail to get there. It's just put there with the confidence that the player's going to see this on the map, so they're going to want to go there and see what it's all about. And I think the Fallout 2 comparison is very apt, because that is another game that I think the first two Fallout games in general did that very well, that sense of exploration, and even a little bit of that, deep mechanical interaction. Like, I think Fallout 2, the Fallout games are not nearly as deep on a mechanical level as this game, but they have a little bit of that flavor, and they have that sense of, I'm just gonna go explore around. When you're on the main world map in Fallout, you might, this whole area is dark down here, let me go south and see what I can see. One of the characters said there was a rumor that there was some sort of crashed ship there, so let me go explore and see what happens, and you might stumble upon something really cool.
Feels like a living, breathing world.
Yes, exactly.
And both of these games, very important, is in both of these games you can target individual body parts. It's kind of cool still that in Fallout you can target the eyes. That you can do in Jagged Alliance. But other than that, this is all in there. This whole level of customization, and we have, honestly, this is a really long podcast already, and we've mentioned so many things, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. Seriously, I have many more things on my list where I'm thinking, like, it doesn't matter. We can, it doesn't matter if we talk about 15 more features or whatever. And in a way, I'm also happy that we approach it like this, because we didn't get very far into the story. So in some ways, it's not even a very spoilery way of treating the game.
The story is kind of unimportant. It's fun, and like we said, there's a lot of personality and character to it, but like, the story doesn't bother to try to justify itself too much. It's like, they're bad guys, you got to go take them out, and that's enough. You don't really need any more than that.
And there's also this extra, like, okay, let's think of the best example lately is Fallout 4 for a game where you get like this really urgent main quest, but then you go everywhere else and do like the most unimportant shit, and it is never really justified with the narrative. And in Jagged Alliance 2, yeah, you have this absolute goal, but all the stuff you do on the side, it kind of justifies itself because you have to uphold an economy of mercenaries and militia and all that kind of stuff. So you go explore, you try to get the population on your side, you try to get influence, you try to get more stream of revenue and all that kind of stuff. So it's justified that you do quests for people instead of going straight for the dictator, because she's really funneled in there. So it makes sense to just try around, and it does not break with the main narrative, which is wonderful.
Because there is a unity of purpose to all of the different systems and facets to this game. You know, they had a sense of like what they wanted to create, and everything that they created in the game serves, I think, this general theme of being the human resources boss from hell, you know, like the ultimate, rebellion simulator. Because, and again, I think, you know, this is not to complain too much that like, oh, it's so terrible now and things were so much better back then. But, you know, these days games are made by huge numbers of people. One person will be working on this part of the game. You know, this other studio will be working on this part of the game. You know, we're going to work on the vehicle section. You guys are working on the combat. You guys are going to work on the space shooter section. And then at the end, it all gets kind of bolted together. Sometimes it works really well, but other times you can tell like, man, this is like 4 different games that kind of all got bolted together. And, you know, Jagged Alliance 2 has a unity to how all of the different systems and mechanics feed into each other that feels incredibly purposeful, and for that reason is, you know, one of the most engaging things I've played in recent memory.
It's so funny how that you mentioned that, because like this gave me this idea of a clever way to describe what makes it great. Because usually there's this saying, it's more than the sum of its parts, right? When you say like, you know, in case of Jagged Alliance, I would say Jagged Alliance is as good as the sum of its parts, and it's amazing because there are so many parts, and they just work.
Yes.
And that is, I think, a very good way to sum up Jagged Alliance too.
It is the sum of many wonderful parts.
Do I need to ask, was it a blast from the past?
Oh my goodness!
It was.
My gosh! Yes,
it was absolutely a blast. And you know, one thing that I noticed, we did not talk about what happened to the series after, but I'm actually quite okay with it. Let's recap it really quickly in one sentence with everything that happened to the Jagged Alliance series that was not fan-made after the release of Jagged Alliance 2 was lukewarm at best and disastrous at worst. So let's really leave it at that. Let's leave it on a high note. Then I would say this is a wonderful point to jump off and say, hey guys, subscribe to our podcast. And right after that,
yeah, be sure like, comment, subscribe, smash that notification button, notification squad.
And
what
join
up?
our page. No, we don't have a Patreon, right?
Yes. Someday. No, don't worry. We're gonna have GOG banners all over this motherfucker, and we'll get our checks. Don't worry, good listeners. We'll get paid for this someday.
I don't care actually. It's just so much fun doing these.
It's a lot. It's too much fun.
That was the initial idea of doing this podcast. Just, you know, like going off topic, kind of like the way this podcast came together was just we had our regular calls or we're hanging out, and then we suddenly ended up in these conversations that took like 1.5 hours just about a single game.
Right.
And then like I think 2 or 3 times we said like we should have recorded that and just made it a podcast, and then at some point we just said like,
and so we did. And so can you. So if you're out there and you want to start a podcast, motherfucking do it. I'm sorry, that was a swear. That was a bad swear. Just do it. Because if 2 idiots like us can, then so can you, my good friends out there.
I have nothing to add to that. Please, you all do podcasts. I want to listen to all of them. Send them in my inbox.
Yes.
And
DM us all of your podcasts and mixtapes and everything else.
Wonderful.
Please.
Okay, on that note, I'm going to leave you out with a Michael, you idiot.